And we are back, Record Live family. We have a special guest on today, Dr. Jeff Parker.
Scary.
I know. Now, Jeff, you've recently been called back to ministry in Tasmania. You're working with the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tasmania, but for a large chunk of time, probably a decade or more, at least at the Australian level, you were at the youth ministry space. You were our youth ministry director for all of Australia. And you were just telling us a little bit about your studies in this space. So today we're going to have a really important conversation, and that is about how we can engage our youth in church, why they're leaving, perhaps. Are they leaving? And what can we, the church, do about it to do better in this space, to really keep our young people connected? Because what we want to see is our faith passed on to the next generation, but potentially, I don't know, we're going to find out today how good a job we're doing of that, and whether there's some areas, some easy low-hanging fruit that we can improve on. So just tell us a little bit about your background, Jeff, and where you've come from, and some of the expertise and the interests you have in this area.
Yeah, been involved in youth ministry up till the end of last year for 27 years. Wow. So was youth director in Tasmania for 6, and then North New South Wales for 9, and then did a 12-year stint at the Union in youth ministry. So quarter of a century means I'm old. But anyway, we focused on youth ministry, and it's really exciting to actually work with the young generations, I have to say, and truly loved that 27 years, the best 27 years of my life. So yeah, it's been a really good experience.
We're young adults. I'm still going to call myself that because Jeff said I could before we started that conversation. Might be on the edge there, but I feel like we clued on in the sense that we can tell when someone's doing something because they're getting paid as a job, or when they're doing it because they have a real heart for it. And I don't actually remember when I first met you, but I feel like I have a memory of you from when I was young, whether at Pathfinders or at Converge or summer camps or whatever. And I've come to know you as someone who has a real passion for young people. And so I'd love to know a little bit about why. Like, you could have chosen any career or you could have chosen any direction with like theology or pastorship. Why is it that you're so passionate about young people specifically? Was it that you had someone mentor you in your own life? Is it because you know the stats? Like, where does that come from?
Well, a few things. I didn't ever want to be a pastor to start with, so and that ended up changing. And then I was a pastor for 3 years, and then they asked me to do youth ministry, and I laughed at them, kind of like. So I think it's really a God thing, because I was trying to run the other way, and God has just pushed me in that direction, and I've been there for a long time. And when I look back, I think, amazing journey, and thanks God for pushing me in that direction. Always been a big kid, really. So I never really grew up. So that's the problem. So a big kid, just very, love to, my body doesn't keep up with what my head says, because I've sort of, that's how it is now. But loved youth ministry, loved Pathfinders, involved in camporees, set up Converge, a dozen years ago, and that's just been an absolute success, with young adults, up to 800 young adults coming every year. Just to have a real passion to see young people step up and to find their place in God's service, first of all, to meet Jesus if they haven't, and then to just find, hey, how do I fit into this, and what can I do? And, but, as you said before, Jared, we are losing too many. Well, yes, the answer is actually yes, we are. We are losing too many. We don't know an actual number in the Adventist Church, but we do know that the Christian church in Australia is losing more than 70% in their 20s to 30. Between 20 and 30, it's around 72 to 76, depends what you read, percent of the young adults are leaving faith. Now, in the Adventist Church, it's not that high, but it's still too high, whatever it is. And it could be somewhere between 1/3 to half. We don't actually know the real facts, because it's really hard to check on that. But we do know that way too many leave the church and leave faith. And that's a real concern. That's been a concern to us in youth ministry for a long time, been a concern to the church. And I guess ultimately a real concern to parents, as parents actually are bringing up their kids, and they hear some of those statistics, they think, oh, hang on, what's happening? You know, are my kids going to fall into that category, or are they going to be into this one? You know, so yeah, interesting.
Can I ask a question on that 70% statistic? Because I've heard that as well, and I was one of those people who left in that age gap. But I've kind of seen, as I've come into my 30s, a lot of, well, not a lot, but a number of people come back. And I don't know if it's like, are we doing something wrong as a church, or is that just part of like the growing up process where people have to kind of like make faith their own and question things? Like, I don't know, do you have statistics of like how many people come back later on?
No, we don't. But when Barna has done research on that, particularly in the US, it's actually showing that they're not coming back like they used to. A lot less are coming back. And that's also a problem, because, you know, we think, oh, yeah, they'll go out for a few years and then they'll come back. I mean, I did that myself, you know, in my late teen years, and then came back, you know, fired up. But you know, a lot of people are not doing that as well. We don't know the numbers. Again, some of that would cost a lot of money to find out, and the church hasn't invested that. But yeah, we probably could find out more about it, but we don't know.
I guess part of the issue, Jeff, is that often we don't have membership statistics for the very young because they're not baptized yet. In our faith tradition, we do sort of adult baptism or young people, but they have to make that decision. And so I guess there's kids growing up in our communities as well that is leaving. And we know for the Adventist Church, I think it's 4 in 10, almost half, are leaving just the whole church. And I imagine that a lot of the young people that are leaving are not factored into those numbers as well, because I know a lot of kids I grew up in Sabbath school with or in church with, they're not there. There are some, and then there are those, at least half, who aren't. And so it is concerning. Now, you wrote for Adventist Record, you've written 2 pieces now on this, and I'll share the links in the comments. For those that are watching on, they can see those links there and they can go read the articles for themselves. But let's get into this. What is the big thing, do you think? Or is there a sort of big ticket item we can look at and go, hey, we really need to start here if we're going to address this whole youth retention issue?
Sure. I would actually say 3 things. So, and in that first article that was in July last year, that you'll put up in the link a bit later, talked about 3 big things. And those 3 big things are simply this. And I'll just explain a little bit. First one is parenting. And you think, oh, how's that youth ministry? Well, it actually is. It's part of what we do in the church. The second thing is intergenerational connections. And the third thing is mentoring. And I'm not talking about formal mentoring here. I'm talking about informal mentoring. And if we as a church can get those 3 things right, we will see a massive change. Now, none of them are rocket science. They're all pretty basic and pretty simple, but we don't generally do them very well. Just an example, and I'll just read a little bit here. This is from the National Study of Youth and Religion, Christian Smith, over in the US. So it's a US study, not Australian study, but they did a longitudinal study on how parents interact with their kids and their longevity in faith. And the interesting thing was that if parents didn't really spend any time or much time at all connecting, talking about spiritual things, even if they were, you know, Christians involved in church, the survey only found 1% stayed in their 20s. 1%.
Wow.
1%. And that blew me away. I thought that has to be a typo, but it actually isn't. And then it said, if you're speaking with your children 3 to 4 times a week about spiritual things, 85% of them stay. So there is a massive difference between what we do as parents. And that's kind of scary, because, you know, what am I doing as a dad, you know? Am I actually making sure that I'm having those regular faith conversations? And it's not necessarily deep theological stuff we're talking about. It's actually questioning. It's like, you know, discussing things about Jesus or God or faith, you know. Those are the things that make the big difference. And so 1% to 85%. Now, I don't know how that fits in Australia, but I'd say that we parallel, pretty closely.
Mm. I just want to reflect on that just before you go on, Jeff. That's so interesting because so often we think of youth ministry as we partition off the youth, we send them out to their own program. We have the whistles and the lights, and we do whiz bang youth ministry. But all three of those things, mentoring, you said intergenerational stuff, and parenting, the family unit, all three of those things include and involve people outside of youth, right?
Sure.
Am I misunderstanding that?
No,
it's about
absolutely.
engaging and involving people outside of the youth demographic to help keep those young people.
Probably 20 years ago, we were quite, youth ministry happened over there and the church ministry happened over there. We've realized in those 20 years or so that isn't going to actually work, and it doesn't work. But that doesn't mean we can't do youth ministry. When we go to big camp, we have the youth tent, we have the high school tent. Absolutely vital. It must be there. But when we come back to the local church has to actually have a link with all of those things. It doesn't mean they can't have their youth room and all those things. But we still, as a church, we have to actually do church as a big group. And if we try to say, that's your patch over there, young people, and that's our patch over here, then when we get to the 17, 18-year-old and we get to that freedom years, well, we say, right, we're done our patch, we're out, and we're gone. And that's what happened. Statistics show that when they graduate from school, they often graduate from church. And you actually, we go to university, now it's a new stage of life. University is often very secular. If you go to Avondale University, very different. But if you go to a public university, very secular, and you're really challenged in your faith. And usually if you don't have that strength and stability, you're gone. And really it's within 3 to 6 months. It's like we're talking little bits. We're not talking massive here. 3 to 6 months, and they're actually out, gone, probably not coming back in the short term at least. So parenting's so important, but the second one was intergenerational connections. And I'm not necessarily talking about a 65-year-old hanging out with 13-year-olds, although that's really important too. But I'm actually talking about your age, Anita, hanging out with the younger generation. You're going to have way more impact on that generation than I am going to have because of my age difference. So automatically, it's more of a challenge for me. If you're only 1 or 2 generations removed from the generation you're dealing with, that spiritual impact you can have is massive. And that's what we're asking our church people to do, is to make sure that we're having those strong connections. Because if we're not connecting as a bunch of generations, we're not taking them on a journey. And it's kind of like you do your ministry over there and they graduate, they will walk away. And we found that a lot of people are graduating in their heads when they're around 13 or 14, but they are still needing to go to church because mum and dad says they need to go. So they still go. But as soon as they get to the freedom years, I got my license, I'm now going to university. Well, hey, I'm not going there anymore. That's that. So the link has to be really sort of embedded into our younger generation. And that brings to the third thing, mentoring. And I'm not talking about the formal, Jared, I'm going to do a mentor thing. We're going to have this weekly connection. We're going to sign an agreement. Now, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about informal, where I'm looking out for 4 or 5 young kids in my church. And this needs to start with the adventurer age. We're talking the kids is where this starts. This is before even Pathfinders and with Pathfinders. And we need to, as a church board and a church business meeting, we need to be making sure that we're actually looking out for our kids. Are we connecting? Do we even know their names? Do we even know who they are? Are they playing sport and having a real success? Are they struggling at school? Do we even know any of that? We probably don't. We probably have no idea what's going on in the kid's life. But if we are having an informal mentoring relationship, we can actually start to connect and build that. And we're not talking weird stuff. We're talking safe. Got to be in with ad safe and all that. We've got to be safe, but you still got to have connection. And so if that connection's built up, what we are hoping to see is that a church over time is able to have those intergenerational connections, really good parenting, informal mentoring between the people of the church and the kids. And when they get to those freedom years, they won't even want to run away because they've got strong connections. And hopefully in that whole process, they're building faith as well. And so they can stand on their own 2 feet in regards to faith. So they're the big three. They're not complicated by any means, or guess they are, because they're hard to do.
I was thinking about this recently, because I think sometimes when we look at people who are younger than us that are coming to church, maybe we kind of think, I think especially if they're with their families, we think, they're good, they're being looked after, they've got a good family. And so we kind of like sit back and relax a little bit on those people. It's the people who I think who obviously are alone who we probably put more energy into. But what are the actual benefits, I suppose, of investing in people even though they have a good family?
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone has the perfect family, straight up. I haven't seen too many, but there are, I guess there's, you could rate families, but how do you do that? I think every family needs support. Whether they're going well or not, I think we need to make sure that we've got that connection built in, because sometimes, when particularly in the teenage years, kids can rebel a little bit with their family, and to have that intergenerational support there to bring them back on track is really helpful for the parent as well, and part of that parenting process. So I think that we need to, even if parents are doing really well, I still think they need help. I think, I need help as a parent from outside. And I've, because I know about this stuff, sometimes I've actually made a phone call and said, hey, I need you to do a bit of informal mentoring for me, you need to get onto this, because I'm struggling here and I need the help. So those kinds of things I think are important as well.
I guess it's that takes a village kind of motto.
Yeah, sticky faith that we talked about probably a decade or so ago. Fuller Theological Seminary talked about, that each kid to survive has to have 5 mentors in their life to survive through church. You just, if you don't have the 5, you usually don't survive, and just lost the light. Yeah.
Interesting.
What about, Jeff, I've seen some commentary lately, at least online, about how our kids aren't necessarily equipped with the answers. Do you think sort of there's a role for, I guess, passing on faith, not just here's the Bible story and here's the moralizing, here's the good lesson, but things like the evidence for the Bible and for the resurrection, things like the creation evolution debates? Because at that age, you're saying they get their freedom, they're going to uni. Often that's when the world can also challenge some of their beliefs. And if they don't have nuanced or well-supported defenses for some of their faith, they can feel, I don't know, disconnected. They can feel stupid. Like, why didn't I ask these questions before this time? And that can really shake their confidence in the whole foundation of faith.
Yeah.
How do we instill some of those apologetics things in younger kids? Because you're saying it's sort of key very early, even in children. How do we start that journey so that when they hit those time periods, they're better equipped to answer some of those questions? Do you think that's an important thing to do?
It has to be done. And if we don't allow our kids to ask questions and get answers, as soon as they get those freedom years, they're going to get smashed. Like, that's the word, smashed. You go to university and it's like, whoa, all that stuff that I was taught is just getting totally like, creation and, Sabbath and all that stuff is just going to get thrown at you, and it's sometimes really tough to survive. And if you don't have some real solid roots, you're probably not going to. And that's why I believe things like Pathfinders, and being a youth director, Pathfinders is our church's best mentoring program that we have so far. We could probably even do better than that, but Pathfinders, you find kids that go through the whole Pathfinder experience of 5 to 6 years and then maybe go into leadership afterwards. Those kids come out, those youth, those teens, they come out pretty good, pretty solid, And I think also kids that don't go and do service, I think it's the ability to be able to ask hard questions and not be fobbed off. I got some really hard questions, but no one's going to answer them. That doesn't help. Sometimes we get asked a hard question and we think, I don't want to deal with that. Can you deal with that? And then I don't want to deal with it. It's just too hard. So And, you know, I've been guilty of that myself and thinking, oh, you know, we're going to do a youth rally. We should do it. No, it's too hard. No, it's too hard. We'll do something we'll start with something a bit easier, you know. But I think sometimes we have to ask the hard questions. And Barna, with his book, You Lost Me, he talks about that same thing. We haven't actually given the ability for our young people to ask the hard questions. Even if we don't have the complete answers, they've got to be able to ask the hard questions and got a forum to discuss it.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's key, is just somewhere to discuss it and ask the questions, even if you don't have the answers. But you raised something in your article. You said Christian goodness, Christian kindness, and a deep sense of genuine care are foundational to keeping young people in the church. And I'm sure many young people in the church can testify that Christian kindness is present. Like, I feel like it's pretty normal that when you go to church, you know, you have people say, hi, how are you? Nice to see you. How was your week? That kind of thing. But I feel like 95% of the time, probably, that's where it kind of stops. And you kind of miss that next step of the relationship. So how can people like start going deeper with younger people? Like, how can they cross those bridges and start to really show that genuine care for them?
Well, what if we started to learn their names? That'd probably be a good starting point, you know. And I'm not trying to be crazy stupid here, but often we have no idea who our kids are in our church. You know, they're out there doing something, but who are they? And just by finding out the names and actually learning the names and having conversation with them is a really good starting point. I think that's really key. Being able to listen to what they're actually, because often their body language is saying things that you know, they're struggling with, or they're asking the real questions, and we're not letting them answer. We're not answering them. It is a tough one. I guess I'll speak for the church that I've been going to for the last few years in Victoria, and that's the Liddell Church, and I can boast about it because I don't lead it, right? So it's got nothing to do with me. But I'm really impressed with what they are doing as a church. They have a service first for more traditional, then they have Sabbath school, and then they have a service afterwards that's a little bit more contemporary. They're not radically different, but they're just a bit different. And they really focus on that intergenerational connection. And I know when we did the whole growing together a few years ago with the 6 essential strategies from the book Growing Young, they were very much involved in that. I think they knew some of that before they even went, but they amplified it even more. And I just see that church, that's one example of a church that's actually doing very well in this space. Now, that doesn't mean they're perfect. They're not. But they're doing really well. And I believe that, you know, you see those kids and teens and youth in the church seem to me to be really switched on. They're asking the hard questions. They got ability to have good discussions. Their Sabbath school time is really positive. The church is involving them in every aspect of church. Like every week they're up the front, and I think, wow, this is good. And that's the kind of thing. And if every church could just, they can't be a Lilydale church, but if every church just, I guess, broadened their ability to interact with their younger generations better and involve them, I think we would see some massive changes.
Something our young people often brush up against is this sort of issue in the church where it's like, we don't trust them enough, like, to get involved. We want church the way we want it, and they might do something a bit risque, or they might say something up the front that's not appropriate. How do we as a church get better at doing some of that? Because I feel like involvement, at least for my journey, being involved in a church was very different to just attending and bumping in and out just for sermon, just for the service. When I was being discipled, when I was involved, that's when I had the most, I guess, the deepest level and the best connection with church, when I felt a sense of ownership. How do we give our young people ownership when they might make mistakes? You know, how do we do that? How do we get better at doing that as the church?
Yeah, well, we struggle with it as a church. And one of those 6 strategies we talked about from the Growing Together was keychain leadership, you know, being able to hand the keys over to the younger generation. And like we're scared of them, I think. They're going to do something that's going to be a little bit radical, and they'll damage us. So I don't know if we want to trust them, you know. There are churches that are trusting them well, though, and the example I spoke about before, and there are mistakes. You see it, and you know, well, hey, I reckon there's one of the younger individuals doing that, you know, like, but that doesn't matter. Let's get behind them and say, hey, pick up the good things they did and run with it. And the informal mentoring I was talking about, that's the key. That's where that comes in. The intergenerational connections is working right there too, because the generations are working across each other. And you've got this person, Zanita, working with, for an example, working with a 14-year-old in your church, and you're guiding that girl or that whoever on a journey, and you're teaching and training. And the church board is probably going to trust that person a whole lot more if they know they've got you as the mentor that's guiding that person. So I think that intergenerational connection, that that mentoring that's, you know, happening behind the scenes is really important, and probably the only way forward, really.
I guess on this mentoring thing, like as a young adult myself, I'm quite aware that I'm not really a priority in other other adults' lives, because, you know, they typically have their own family, they typically have a job, they've typically got responsibilities in the church, they've typically got like their own friends that they're trying to, I guess, make time for. So my expectations of other adults are quite small. And I think when I have seen people just make small efforts, I'm really thankful and I've been really grateful, because I'm like, I have this understanding that they have other priorities and they have other things in their life. And I think some people, they kind of hear the word mentor and they are kind of intimidated because they think of this like Karate Kid one-on-one kind of relationship where they're, you know, giving someone lessons and they're pouring all this time into people, when really it can be done in such smaller kind of moments. But I don't know if you have any stories or examples or any ways that you've kind of seen this mentorship lived out, maybe in like ways that we're not thinking of ourselves.
Look, probably just, I might read this. This was when we did the survey. We surveyed over 600 young adults to ask them all sorts of things. This is Adventist young adults, about church life, about their challenges and all sorts of things. Never talked about mentoring directly. Interesting, but it came up often over and over again. And this is just one. Since becoming a single mother out of wedlock, the church has been more supportive than I could have ever imagined. It came as a real surprise to me, as I know I did the wrong thing, so I assumed there would be tension within the church. As far as I can see and tell, everyone at my home church has embraced me further into the church family and have done all they can to support me. People who never spoke to me before now take the time to check in on me, and this has really showed me the value of the solid church family. And this was survey number 277, because it's anonymous, so we've just got a number beside it. But this is a young woman who is part of one of our churches in Australia. That actually, this is a real snippet, you know. And to me, that's amazing. But here's another one. I grew up in a single parent family. I think my mum saw my older brothers leave the church because they had no strong mentor, despite her best efforts. So she made sure I was plugged in with supportive mentors from the youth group I attended, to pastors and other leaders. I'm so grateful I had these people, but I also wonder where these people were for my brothers. I don't understand why the church didn't reach out for them. Wow. You know, that's just two little snippets of a negative and I guess a positive. You know, like, well, there's a few negatives and some positives all mixed in together there, but we just got to, I guess, change our mindset and look out for those around us, whether we're young or old or whatever. It doesn't really matter.
You framed it as informal mentoring, and I guess that's not like filling out paperwork and meeting regularly necessarily, but I guess the way I'm thinking of it from what you're describing and what you've been saying is maybe the word intentional would work well there. It's not it's not haphazard, it's not just sort of informal in that sense, but it's intentionally identifying people that might need, you know, an arm around their shoulder or a tap on the back and just an encouragement and that sort of thing. So I think if we think about it, who can we be intentional with? And And that, we're fast running out of time, but that leads us to our sort of final thing we like to do on Record Live here is to get a bit practical. And so this week, Jeff, for anyone watching this now or in the future, they found it on YouTube, they're listening to the podcast, what can they do in their own life, in their own church, to start this journey, to help the young people to be retained, to be to feel like an important part of the church community? Give us something practical that we can just start doing this week.
Well, I would say have a think about where you worship, where you're involved, and think of 3 people, 3 of that younger generation that you can intentionally look out for and start to have a connection with. Find out their names. You don't have to be over the top. In fact, an informal, how I call it informal, you had said intentional mentorship, they don't even know, right? So the mentee has no idea that this is what's taking place. So that's why I call it informal. The only person who knows is me, who's now looking out for those 3 individuals in my church that I can try to build a long-term connection with. A safe long-term connection, obviously, but a long-term where I'm checking on them. I'm finding out when they come to church what they've been up to. If they're involved in school play, I'll probably go and watch it and give them some feedback. All that sort of thing. 3 people in my church this week or this weekend that I can look at and say, I'm going to make an effort to really get involved in their life. That's my takeaway for today.
Love it. Good stuff. Attainable. I think that's something that we can all go and do. Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on Record Live and talking to us today. It's been great to just learn from you and learn your wisdom. Thank you for everything you do in the adult space and everything you've done over the many years. And
thank you.
Hopefully we'll have you on for another episode in the future.
Had a ball. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. God bless.